Last night, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton made her stance on this Bergdahl prison exchange known. Here's what she said.
A lot of our closest allies do prisoner exchanges to get our POWs back all the time. The idea that you really care for your own citizens, and particularly those in uniform, I think is a very noble one.
Here with reaction, Texas Governor Rick Perry, who may be facing her come 2016. You don't know. He hasn't given us an answer yet. Is this the equivalent, Governor, of, oh, what difference does it make if he was a deserter?
Well, Sean, we hear that too often out of this administration about, what difference does it make? And I think the American citizens are getting tired of that. And frankly, men and women in the military are losing confidence in this administration's ability to conduct foreign policy in an appropriate way. But here's the bigger concern for me, and I really would like for somebody to take a look at this and answer it. I mean, was this done to take the VA off the front page of the newspapers? An absolute debacle that we've seen this administration not taking care of the men and women of our military. And this kind of happened all of a sudden, it seems like. There was the Congress didn't even know about it when Dianne Feinstein and the Republican counterpart are both saying that laws of our country were broken by the president not even giving them any indication that they were going to do this. So the question is, what is the strategy here? What is the foreign policy that's going into place here? Is it just haphazard? Is it just whatever we need to do to move a press story a day to get something off of the front page of the papers? I don't know, but it's really troubling when you see the President of the United States.
I spoke to Darren Andrews. He's from your state of Texas. He's from Dallas. He lost his life searching for a man that everybody knew had deserted, because I've spoken now to many, many people in his platoon. I spoke with his mother today, his wife, who gave birth to their daughter 3 months after he died and had a 2-year-old son from Dallas, gave his life looking for him. They knew he was a deserter. Is that a mistake? And what do you think of the trade itself?
Well, obviously, this is incredibly troubling. If the military leadership, if the administration did not have a better handle on this, when we hear all of these conflicting stories out there's a letter, there's this, if they knew all of these things.
They did know.
And they still went forward with this. I think there's just a lot of questions that are incredibly troubling to the American people, and this is not going well for this administration at all.
Why
and they need to come forward, come clean, tell us what happened, tell us why they really went forward with this.
And why did they circumvent the laws we discussed earlier? And number two,
absolutely,
these are the 5 worst at Gitmo. These were hardcore terrorists.
And that gets to the real core of the foreign policy debacle that's going on out there. Every American citizen, every man and woman in uniform now is going to be trade bait for people like the Taliban, and if that's how we're going to be conducting foreign policy in the future, I think we got big, big problems in front of us.
All right, Governor, thank you so much for being with us, as always. Appreciate it.
You're welcome, Sean.
And coming up next, Colonel Oliver North. He knows a thing or two about all this. He's going to join in and weigh in on the release of the Taliban Dream Team. And welcome back to Hannity. Now, earlier today, President Obama defended the prisoner swap during a press conference. He was in Poland. Take a look.
This is what happens at the end of wars. That was true for George Washington. That was true for Abraham Lincoln. That was true for FDR. That's been true of every combat situation, that at some point you make sure that you try to get your folks back.
Here to respond, Fox News military analyst and War Stories host, our friend Colonel Oliver North. Colonel, by the way, I did speak to the mother of Darren Andrews. This kid had a 3-year-old daughter born 3 months after he was killed. He had a 2-year-old son that he left behind. And I told him about the Freedom Alliance and that you were going to give him a call, and I know you will. So
you're on for that scholarship, my friend. Thank you.
No, and I said that to the mother. I don't even know what to say anymore. This takes my breath away.
Let me first of all, that's the bracelet of Bowe Bergdahl with his date of capture, 30 June 2009, that I've worn ever since he was captured, and his mother gave me this bracelet. Now, let me make a couple of factual corrections.
You were wearing that bracelet the whole time?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've had it on literally nonstop. It's now off. Let me just make a couple of quick points. First of all, unlike what Mrs. Clinton said, unlike what Chuck Hagel has said, and this president has said, Bergdahl was not a prisoner of war held by the Taliban. he was a hostage of a criminal enterprise, the Akani network. Now, the Akanis have been taking captives for ransom for decades. Second, POTUS just said on what the sound you just played, the sound bite you just played, this is how wars end. That's true if we've consummated some kind of agreement on ending the conflict. And he cited several examples that are all true, but the war was over. Maybe this president thinks unilateral surrender is the way to end the war. Now, here's some questions that need to be asked and answered. Number one, was a ransom paid to the Akanis? Because that's all they really wanted in exchange for this guy for years. And if a ransom was paid, either at our behest or with American tax dollars, it means this government is causing to be funded a criminal enterprise that kills Americans, the Akanis. Number two, why were the 5 Taliban kingpins released from Gitmo? I think the question asked by Governor Perry is dead on. Why were they released? And third, what assurance do we have that the Qataris are going to keep the 5 from returning to the battlefield? What's the real reason
They're
for
walking around
violating the law requiring congressional notification for 30 days prior to releasing detainees from Gitmo? And does this president realize that having announced the terms of this exchange, every American, not just those on the battlefield, every American traveling overseas becomes vulnerable to kidnapping and being held for ransom? Now, given the uproar over how Sergeant Bergdahl became a hostage, a senior U.S. officer in the armed forces of the United States in his chain of command needs to stand up on his hind feet and convene an Article 32 investigation. It's the only way, the only fair way to give Sergeant Bergdahl justice. Either exonerate him or condemn him. But everybody who's saying the things that they're saying need to do so under oath in an Article 32, which is the military equivalent of a grand jury, and it's the fairest system of justice around. That's why I asked for a court-martial when I was going through my ordeal back in the 80s, and of course why the special prosecutor wasn't about to give me one.
Wasn't the ransom the 5 Taliban guys they wanted? That's
No.
ransom.
No.
You think they
No.
wanted money too?
That's all they wanted. I know a lot about hostage negotiations, please, and we don't need to get into all that tonight. It's not right to say we've never negotiated with the enemy. George Washington did so. In the aftermath of the Barbary Wars, Tom Jefferson, having beaten the Barbary pirates to a pulp in 1805, thanks to Lieutenant Presley O'Bannon, United States Marine Corps, paid $60,000 in ransom to the Pasha to buy U.S. citizens from slavery. That's the way it works. The reality is they never talk about it. Ronald Reagan didn't, and this guy shouldn't have done it. It's a disaster the way this has all come out.
And coming up, the White House is now apologizing for failing to alert Congress about the Bergdahl swap. When we come back, constitutional law professor Jonathan Turley, he's here to talk about the legal ramifications of that bombshell. And welcome back to Hannity. Now, the Obama White House is now acknowledging that it did not properly inform Congress before it made the Bergdahl swap. Now, Senator Dianne Feinstein told Fox News today that the Deputy National Security Advisor called her last night to apologize for failing to inform her about the exchange. Here now with reaction, George Washington University constitutional law professor Jonathan Turley. You said it was illegal. You also said that we are at a constitutional tipping point, that this is basically standard fare for this administration. Explain.
Well, unfortunately, Sean, this has become something of a mantra from this administration, that the president has decided that he would not comply with federal law. And even though one could agree with many of the policies, as I do, that this administration holds, the means that it is selecting are very troubling, that this president once again has said that he simply chose not to comply with federal law. But more importantly, the administration is all over the boards on this. You know, as this story has been unfolding, we've heard various justifications and rationales for the failure to comply, including a bizarre argument that they did comply with the notification law by not notifying Congress. And that was a bit hard to get one's mind around.
Yeah, you know, we do have co-equal branches of government, separation of powers. You teach this regularly. You agree with the president politically. For you to say that we are at a tipping point constitutionally, now I agree with you. What does that mean, considering our Constitution is our rule of law, and they're ignoring it?
Well, unfortunately, our system is changing, and it's changing without a debate or even a discussion as to what we are going to do in the future when we have a three-branch system, a tripartite system, but one branch is so dominant. What's emerging is an imperial presidency, an uber presidency, as I've called it, where the president can act unilaterally. This is only the latest example of that. What's troubling is that we have a system that has been stable precisely because these are limited and shared powers. This president has indicated that he's just not willing to comply with some of those aspects. You know, he told Congress he would go it alone. And in our system, you're not allowed to go it alone.
And if I broke the law, why do I think they'd be the first people to handcuff me, perp walk me, and send me off to jail? Just my belief system. Paranoia or truth?
Well, I think that the biggest problem we have is that the system itself, if we have a dominant branch, simply begins to shut down in terms of the safeguards. People don't seem to understand that the separation of powers is not about the power of these branches. It's there to protect individual liberty. It's there to protect us against the concentration of power. That's what's occurring here. You know, I've said it before that Barack Obama is really the president Richard Nixon always wanted to be. You know, he's been allowed to act unilaterally in a way that we fought for so many decades.
I hope people are listening, Professor. Thank you, as always, for your insight and your honesty.
Thanks,
we appreciate it. And welcome back to Hannity. Now, yesterday, Press Secretary Jay Carney, he claimed the 5 Gitmo detainees freed as part of this prisoner swap were not a security threat. Well, now the commander-in-chief, he contradicted Jay Carney, his own spokesperson, and said, absolutely, there's a possibility they will, in fact, return to the battlefield. Here with reaction, Fox News contributor DeRoy Murdoch, co-host of The Five, Dana Perino. How does Jay Carney say one thing one day and the president contradict him the next day?
It is a difficult thing to do, especially remember my theory that anytime a president goes on a foreign trip, something bad is happening back at home that he needs to be paying more attention to, and that is the case in this regard.
Yeah, you know what?
But I think the president had to say, if he was, after he did this, he had to say that there's a possibility they would go back to the battlefield.
He did not say that.
Right, because there is a possibility.
See, that's why I refer to Jay Carney as Baghdad Bob Carney. I mean, he's become such a propagandist at this point.
Well, look, I mean, yes, they can go back to the battlefield in Afghanistan. I imagine after a year in Qatar, they may hop on planes and go there. But listen, for the next year, they're able to walk around. They're not in jail. They can walk around Qatar and do as they want. They can make phone calls to raise money. Yeah. They can do these fiery sermons to get people all pumped up. Yep. They can do online training.
They can disappear.
They could vanish. I mean, they can do a lot of damage just by sitting in offices and doing what they do. And I'm sure they're going to do that.
See,
they're probably starting to do it already.
They say we didn't negotiate with terrorists. That's a lie.
Yeah, that's
Jay Carney said they were safe. We didn't have any security concerns. That's a lie. The idea that they were going to be in prison and that we'll be watching them, that's a lie. None of this is true. And then I'm tired of being lied to.
And then Obama says, well, you know, this is what happens at the end of wars. You swap prisoners.
Is this the end of the war?
It's not the end of the war. I mean, imagine if we had in our custody Erwin Rommel, Rudolf Hess, Joseph Goebbels. Would we send them back to Germany in exchange for one soldier, maybe a deserter, in 1943? Or do you wait till the war is over before you start swapping prisoners?
Dana, isn't this the philosophical divide that this president doesn't recognize? Radical Islamic terrorism is a real, clear, present danger to the United States.
The thing that's difficult to understand is that there's another report out today, and not only are the prisoner or the former Gitmo detainees free to go around Qatar, they actually, somehow we gave them an assurance, the Qataris, that we would not be following them. I mean, I hope that that's not true.
Well, the president said today, we'll keep an eye on them. You know, but right. Think about this. You know, I didn't think that the objective in a war, this was the good war that he said we ought to be fighting. The objective was to get Americans out. Not, aren't we supposed to win a war?
Well, and to your point about what kind of a war is it? There's a war in Afghanistan, but the bigger war and the war where detainees are held in Guantanamo,
yep.
It's the war on terror.
Yeah.
These are enemy combatants. Ideologically, the terrorists, they don't want our land. They hate our ideas. They hate us for what we are. So it is a different type of war. But they certainly completely miscalculated the response. And I think Americans are not asking.
They thought they'd be heroes.
Illegitimate questions.
Dana's absolutely right. This is a big victory. This was described by Mullah Omar as a huge and vivid triumph for the Mujahideen.
He's right.
And
he's right.
Islamic terrorists around the world are high-fiving each other
and laughing
at us. And that only puts all of us in grave danger of being killed.
We have to
Thank you very much.